In this movie, I'll show you how to load my custom keyboard shortcuts, which are known as dekeys. Now, I've been creating these things for close to 20 years, and they seem to meet with general approval. And the idea is to open up the keyboard a little bit and take advantage of some of the shortcuts that otherwise go unused inside Photoshop. And I try to direct these shortcuts at the most common and just plain useful features in the software, as opposed to the bright, shiny new features, which is the way Adobe sometimes works. And I've gone ahead and updated these files thoroughly for the most recent version of Photoshop, regardless of which platform you may be using. And so, if you have access to my exercise files, then go ahead and open up the 31 settings folder, at which point you'll see a couple of .kys files. These are the keyboard shortcuts themselves. I also have a subfolder of PDF documentation, which tells you what every single keyboard shortcut does, whether it's one of Photoshop's default shortcuts or one of mine. All right, so go ahead and locate the .kys file that corresponds to your platform. In my case, I'm working with Windows, so I'll go ahead and right-click on the Win file right here, and then I'll choose Open With. Now on the Mac, you should see a submenu that includes the most recent version of Photoshop, in which case all you have to do is choose it. On a PC, you may not see a submenu at all, in which case just go ahead and choose the Open With command. Now notice that I can open this file inside Premiere Pro. In fact, that is the default application on this particular system, which is not what I want. It's not going to do me any good. You can also open your keyboard shortcuts in a text editor if you like. Obviously, I want Photoshop, but if you're not seeing Photoshop, then just go ahead and click on this guy, Choose Another App, in order to bring up this window, and then if necessary, click on More Apps down here, locate Photoshop, the most recent version of course, and then go ahead and click OK. Now you can turn on this checkbox if you always want to open KYS files in Photoshop, but I doubt you're going to do that very often, so I'm just going to go ahead and click OK, and that will bring Photoshop to the foreground. Now, if at any point in time you've created your own custom keyboard shortcuts and you haven't saved them, then you're going to get this alert message right here that's asking if you want to save your changes before you load the new shortcuts. I'm just going to say no. Now, at this point, it looks like nothing has happened. After all, we're just seeing an image here inside Photoshop. To confirm your shortcuts have actually loaded, go to the Edit menu and drop down to the Keyboard Shortcuts command, which itself has a shortcut of Control-Shift-Alt-K. That's Command-Shift-Option-K on the Mac. Now, you may wonder why in the world I'm saying the modifier keys in the opposite order that they appear in the menu. And that's because keyboard shortcuts are listed flush right in opposite order, which makes them easier to read. And so reading from the right over to the left, we start off with the alphanumeric key, in this case K, and then we see the primary modifier key, which is Control on the PC or Command on the Mac, followed by the secondary modifier key, which is Shift on both platforms, and then finally Alt here on a PC or Option on a Mac. Now, if you were to say things in the order they appear, that is Alt-Shift-Control-K or Option-Shift-Command-K on the Mac, you're going to sound, and I'm going to be honest about this, like an absolute buffoon. That is just not the way these things are said. And this is a function of a convention that goes back to the 1980s. All right, so I'll go ahead and choose the command in order to bring up the Keyboard Shortcuts dialog box, and notice that the set reads Photoshop defaults in parentheses modified, and that tells you that you have just modified Photoshop's default shortcuts. And to confirm that's the case, make sure Shortcuts 4 is set to Application Menus, and then twirl open this guy right here, Layer, and you should see up here at the top the word New. That indicates a submenu under the Layer menu. The Layer command itself has a keyboard shortcut of Control-Shift-N or Command-Shift-N on the Mac. That is a default shortcut inside Photoshop. I've added the next two. So notice that we've got a shortcut of Control-Shift-Alt-N, that's Command-Shift-Option-N on the Mac, which is going to either convert the background to an independent layer or it's going to convert the selected layer to the background. So that's a toggle. And then if you press Control-G or Command-G on the Mac, you're going to not only group any and all selected layers inside the Layers panel, but you're also going to be able to name that group as you create it. All right, so what I recommend you do now is go up to this little hard drive icon, the one with an ellipses underneath it, that is a ... Go ahead and click on that guy, and that will allow you to save your keyboard shortcuts. And notice by default, you're saving them inside this Keyboard Shortcuts folder that exists inside of a presets folder that is buried deep in your hard drive. That's exactly what you want. So go ahead and leave that alone. And then just go ahead and name the shortcuts anything you like. I'm going to call mine dekeys for Photoshop CC, and then I'll click Save. And notice that the set now appears with that name, at which point all you need to do is click OK in order to accept that change. And now notice if I go to the Layer menu and choose New, that I have those keyboard shortcuts that we were seeing a moment ago. So Control-Shift-N, Command-Shift-N on the Mac for a new layer, Control-Shift-Alt-N or Command-Shift-Option-N on the Mac in order to convert a layer to the background or the background to an independent layer. And then we've got Control-G or Command-G on the Mac in order to group the selected layers and name that group. And then if you go ahead and switch over to the File menu, you'll see that Open as Smart Object now has a keyboard shortcut of Control-Shift-Alt-O. That's Command-Shift-Option-O on the Mac, and that is the letter O, by the way. And Place Embedded now has a shortcut of Control-Alt-D. That's Command-Option-D on the Mac. You may wonder why I chose D, and that is because that is an old-school shortcut for placing images that started inside PageMaker and lives on inside InDesign. And that's how you load dekeys, which supplies you with nearly 90, that is 90 new keyboard shortcuts. To find out what those are, stay tuned for the following movie.